Politico White House correspondent Dasha Burns, White House Bureau Chief Dasha Burns. Dasha, you're with us. What about this and how this developed and your reaction to this Truth Social post?
Well, look, Brett, I was hearing just before I got to the studio here today that the president was very serious about the diplomatic efforts, that he felt he had the right people negotiating, that they were negotiating in good faith, both on the U.S. side and on the Iranian side, which was very different from earlier this year, just before he really started this conflict, when you had Witkoff and Kushner come back from those negotiations and say, you know what, this doesn't feel quite right. That is not the tone that I've been hearing from the officials that I've been speaking with over the course of the last 12 to 24 hours, which have just been so incredibly critical. Plus, you had the brokers of Pakistan involved here, which is a country, and the army chief in Pakistan. The president does have a very good relationship with him, and he's built great relationships with Witkoff in particular. And so all of these pieces sort of coalesce to bring this from the brink, which, I've been hearing that more and more resources had been moving into the theater. I mean, he could have pressed go at any moment here. And his rhetoric, Brett, I mean, what I'd been hearing from the president in the briefing room yesterday, and his phone calls today, and of course on Truth Social, I mean, I have not heard the president speak in this way, either first term or this term. So he really laid it all out here. And potentially that is what brought everyone to kind of a surprising conclusion, because a lot of folks thought that this could go a different way.
Yeah. Bring in the rest of the panel, Fox News political analyst Juan Williams, as well as Fox News contributor Hugh Hewitt. Hugh, your reaction today, I did your radio show earlier, and there was a thought that this was maybe getting to this 8 p.m. I did talk to the president this morning. He was going to hold the line on that, but said that negotiations were heated late in the afternoon, and obviously they got to a point where he is ready to take this deal.
Well, he was very serious with you, Brett, and I took that as confirmation that the B-52s that had taken off were going to deliver the ordnance. I think this is a big win for President Trump. I think Iran blinked. His Truth post, the most recent one, says, subject to the opening of the Strait of Hormuz. If they don't open the strait, we'll be doing this again tomorrow, but if they do open the strait, big win for the president. As he said in his first post this morning, he wants the best for the people of Iran. He wants this 47-year reign of terror to be over. Looks like he won a big step today.
There was all this talk, Juan, about how there may not be negotiators on the other side in Iran, that this may all be made up and this is all dragging, just to make the markets feel good. This is something real that is tangible, and it looks like it's being acted on.
Well, to your point about the economy, I think a lot of this, the question is, was he bluffing, the president, in talking about ending a civilization, to drive the markets and to drive down oil prices, to let them know that there was some end in sight? The market was down a little bit today. We'll see what the reaction to this is. But to the big question, both on the economic front and the political front, was who was bluffing. The Iranians clearly want to prolong this war. They are losing militarily without a doubt, but they are of a mind that they are gaining some sense of resistance and pride in taking on the United States and the big military outfit. That's why the Iranians said they were going to put their civilians around their infrastructure. And the sense is that if they are able to prolong what the president had hoped would be a 2 to 3 week war, now 6 weeks, now then it's going to be 2 months with 2 more weeks added. If the Iranians keep going from there, where does President Trump go?
Yeah, I don't know, Juan. Kellyanne, I see it differently. I see the Iranians saying, we got to get out of this mess.
Yes.
I mean, that's what I read from this.
No. That is the only fair reading, objective reading, frankly, because if you don't believe me, believe Iran. I mean, they're negotiating the settlement now, and it sounds like, and they're not winning this war by any account. Their Navy, their military capability, we know they killed 45,000 protesters at the very least. I think outside of the South Sudan, there's probably nowhere in the world where women were brutalized worse, maybe at least in the top 5, Brett. And of course, what they've done with Israel. But I do think it's fascinating that we're just having this realignment of geopolitics. I don't think this could have happened, let alone successfully for President Trump, had he not done the Abraham Accords and so much else with the Gulf states in the first term, had both Obama and Biden not screwed up so royally in Iran by giving them pallets of cash, by mollifying them, by not being more aggressive with Iran and allowing the JCPOA and looking the other way. And so I think this is Iran honestly doesn't have a lot of leverage here, and we just learned that tonight.
Mike Tobin, getting up in Tel Aviv, even though this is announced a double-sided ceasefire, this has not gotten word to the people firing missiles, Mike?
Well, it seems that way. Just about 5 minutes from the time we got the announcement that we had that Truth Social post, and you read it on the air there, then the phone started lighting up, indicating that more missiles were inbound. From looking at what we get over the rather sophisticated phone alert system that they have here in Israel, looks like these missiles will fall probably somewhere between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, or possibly south toward the area of Ashkelon. And what we have seen mostly in recent days is these cluster bombs that come through. That way, even when the interceptors get them, you get them, they break up into dozens of bomblets, each of them with about 10 pounds of explosives in them, so they can still be quite lethal. And there have been situations where people have been out in the street, they didn't get into the bomb shelters, and those bomblets are enough to kill people. But clearly an act, either the message didn't get through, or what we often see in the Middle East here, when there's an agreement, someone just tries to be defiant one more time before the agreement goes through. Brett.
Yeah, where do you think the Israelis are on all of this, as far as how involved in some of this negotiation, or where they stand about what their targeting is going to be or might not be for the next 2 weeks?
Well, I think that particularly Prime Minister Netanyahu has been happy to let President Trump take the driver's seat on this one and ride shotgun. I think that he is very interested in an outcome. I think that the Israelis ultimately have the same goal as the United States. I think the Strait of Hormuz is of less importance to them as regime change. I think if regime change happens, you could change the dynamic out here where you don't have the proxies menacing Israel as they have done now for decades. But that is their position. And we're watching the skies now out to the east to see if some of these missiles appear in the sky. As they do, the ballistic missiles, unlike the kind of things that we see fired out of Lebanon or the Gaza Strip, the ballistic missiles will appear like shooting stars in the sky when they arrive in the area, Brett.
All right, Mike, we'll head back for any more breaking details out of Tel Aviv. Back to the panel. Hugh, there was a lot of reaction to the president's early Truth Social about annihilation, the wiping out of a civilization. There was all kinds of reaction and talk about that. But that forceful positioning may have gotten us to where we are here?
Look, it may have worked. Number one, we don't know who is running Iran. We don't know what they read. We don't know what the Farsi translation is. But anyone in the United States who read the civilization to be destroyed as the whole people of Iran is acting in bad faith, because he said explicitly, we're bringing to an end the 47-year regime, that's the IRGC, and God bless the people of Iran. So people can act in bad faith. The president didn't. He was threatening the regime. They got the message. They begged for the ceasefire.
Is there a concern, Dasha, inside the circle that giving them a ceasefire for however long, to Mark's point earlier, gives them a lifeline? I think General Keane said something similar earlier today. And how loud is that voice inside the administration?
I mean, that's the challenge of this position for the president. If he were to go full force tonight, there were serious consequences and serious risks involved. There are consequences and risks to this as well. It is now a bit of a high wire act for these next 2 weeks that he has laid out, because it is all going to depend on how this ends up. Either it's art of the deal and he wins something for the United States that is historic and unprecedented and he takes a massive victory lap, or he winds up with something where people can say, well, why did we do all of this just to get back to some sort of status quo? So everything depends on how this ultimately ends. And this is a moment where really the hard work begins for his team.
Yeah. I had economist Juan earlier today on Stuart Varney's show, talking about the price of oil and how much this has affected the overall feeling of the economy, saying that getting back to where it was may take some time. Take a listen.
getting back down to, let's say, $65 a barrel may take a little bit of time. It may take 6 months. For the entire year, you're probably not going to see another year where the S&P 500 is up by a double-digit percentage amount. It's going to do well. It's going to hang in there. Again, no gloom, but no boom.
So at oil prices now, you've got it at crude at 114 tonight. Your thoughts on how much that factored in to this? I mean, this operation had a set of objectives at the beginning, but clearly the world oil market and how people are feeling about their gas prices factors in.
I think it's a huge political quotient as we look at what's going on with the calculus on both sides. And I think that, by constricting the Strait of Hormuz, the Iranian regime, or what remains of it, understood that was their ace in the hole. That's what they were controlling. It's the reason they had any hope of saying that they were holding off President Trump. And on President Trump's side of the table, I think he was concerned increasingly about the high cost of oil and the impact even on gas prices here at home. The thing about it, as we enter this new period, this new 2-week period, we still don't know exactly if the Iranians are trustworthy. So how long will this last? Will they live up to their promises? And two, the American people don't know. We don't know how long this is going to last. We don't even know who is in charge in Iran and if we've had any success in possibly bringing in more reasonable people to what's been a monstrous regime.
Yeah, but Hugh, part of that is why we're in this in the first place. We knew the Iranians were not trustworthy. We knew they had missiles that could go farther than they said they could go, and then we saw them fired at Diego Garcia. We knew that they had nuclear material, and then they put it on a piece of paper to Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff and said 60% enriched uranium, 900 pounds of it.
For 47 years, they have been lying. For 47 years, they have been exporting terror. For 47 years, they've been killing Americans. President Trump has brought them to heel if they keep their pledge to open the Strait of Hormuz. If they don't, we'll go back to whatever is the highest level of attack that he had planned. It will not be a war crime. It will be a campaign against the regime. I note that we dropped massive ordnance penetrators on a gathering of about 50 IRGC people in the middle of that amazing rescue on Easter Sunday. We don't know who's in charge, but they have that mosaic defense. So it'll take a while to see if the Iranians are really committed to this, but if so, those oil tankers are going to flow tomorrow, and we'll see oil drop down to, I think, below 3 figures tomorrow.
Mark, how does this play? If it works out in President Trump's favor, does this factor in, this whole thing, does this factor into November?
Well, absolutely. I think the whole question is, Americans have been pessimistic for such a long time. And here they see, wow, the plane is shut down. We actually can get somebody out. Wow, we actually can get people to the moon again. We actually can kind of capture those bad guys, right?
Yeah,
and
it's an American exceptionalism story,
Right.
and it's ahead of the 250th.
Right.
I think it comes back, and I think the notion that we also have advanced technology that we're the world leader in, if he gets some good economic news and he could marshal these 10 other positive events, then will people want to keep moving forward with him and his leadership? That's really his opportunity here. That's what he has to do to be successful.
I mean, the volume and velocity with which Donald J. Trump operates defies all kinds of political
Trust
gravity.
us.
Yes,
We know.
and he, for sure. And he is also benefited by his opponents. They really bring nothing except criticism and negativity and naysaying. Where's their plan? Why did they look the other way? Hugh said 47 years, this, that, and the other. I'll add one to the list. For 47 years, we had presidents from both parties look the other way on everything Iran has been doing. I also want to remind people on the right, of which I'm a very proud member, peace through strength does include the strength part too sometimes. And I think the president's going to have facts and figures on his side after this for his affordability, security, fairness, energy agenda. And he's very good at explaining why he's doing something. The transparency, I think, benefits him, Brett. I know it's exhausting for news folks, but it benefits him because the people will never go back to a presidency that is not full-facing, public-facing, transparent, and bringing us along, informing us. The man who gave us a primetime address last Wednesday turned around in the briefing room yesterday on Monday, all weekend long and all day today, also communicating with us on social media.
Well, not only that, but also picking up the phone and talking to reporters and anchors and But at the same time, Dasha, not saying some things, like holding back on the things that he said he was never going to talk about, like operations and where things really stood behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the White House has been very quiet today, and I'm told that was purposeful. The president knew the whole world was watching. White House officials were not answering a ton of questions, certainly not on the record, because they wanted to give the president that time and that space. And look, for the American people, I had been told throughout end of last year and into early this year that the White House wanted Americans to feel the benefits of the big, beautiful bill right now. This is tax season. This is when they were hoping that Americans would feel what the president has been doing for the economy. This conflict has changed that calculation a little bit, and I think that's part of the reason why there's such a feeling of crunch time right now, of hoping that the American people can see how this is going to come to an end. Again, this 2 weeks now is really critical, not only for the world order, but also for folks understanding what might happen to their pocketbooks here going forward.
Yeah, and let me just read a piece of this again. This is from the Truth Social just moments ago. Subject to the Islamic Republic of Iran agreeing to the complete, immediate, and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz, I agree to suspend the bombing and attack of Iran for a period of 2 weeks. This will be a double-sided ceasefire. A 2-week period will allow the agreement to be finalized and consummated. Juan, you wonder where the allies that maybe have not gotten into this, where they are now, and what happens with them in this 2-week period as well.
Well, it's very important because imagine if you own a boat that's going through the Strait of Hormuz. You're going to want to know that you can have some assurances that your boat's not the one that's going to get blown up. And that the Iranians are trustworthy. And so the allies, and they have much larger dependence on oil coming through that strait than the United States does, will have an additional reason to want to offer some support. But this is a tricky 2-week moment. I mean, you know, it's easy to start a war. What we're seeing is it's hell to get out.
Hugh, last word.
Big win for the president. I want to repeat that. All subject to those boats moving through the strait without being molested by Iran. If Iran breaks the deal, the president will not hesitate to use that peace through strength that Kellyanne referenced. But for tonight, everybody should take a big, deep sigh of relief and watch the oil move.
Well, I think a lot of prayers were answered. Panel, thank you very much. Rolling with the punches. Breaking news here on Special Report.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.